Montana Territory, 1875. Quinn Foster stood on the worn wooden porch of his modest ranch house, watching the approaching stagecoach kick up dust along the winding road. His heart hammered against his ribs as he tugged at his freshly pressed shirt, a garment rarely worn on his working cattle ranch 20 miles outside of Riverspend. At 25, Quinn had carved out a respectable operation, nothing grand, but his own. 100 head of cattle, a sturdy home built with his own hands, and land stretching toward the distant mountains. Yet for all his accomplishments, the ranch felt hollow. Empty rooms echoed with silence each night after his ranch hands departed to their bunkhouse. Quinn believed that the frontier demanded solitude from a man. His father's words haunted him still. "The West takes more than it gives, boy. A man's better off alone than dragging someone he loves into this hardship." Quinn had lived by those words since burying his parents 6 years ago, victims of a harsh winter and harsher fever. He'd convinced himself that loneliness was the price of frontier life, that love was a luxury the West could not sustain. Yet here he stood, waiting for a stranger to become his wife. The letter in his pocket crinkled as he shifted his weight. 3 months ago, in a moment of weakness after a particularly isolating winter, he placed an advertisement in an eastern newspaper. Montana rancher seeks bride. Comfortable home, honest work, respectable prospects. He'd received one reply, from a Jane Zimmer of Philadelphia. Their correspondence had been brief, practical. She sought a fresh start. He needed a partner to share his burdens. An arrangement, not romance. The stagecoach pulled to a stop before his property. Quinn straightened his shoulders and ran a hand through his sandy brown hair, trimmed short for the occasion. His clean-shaven face felt strange after weeks of stubble, but he'd wanted to make a proper impression. The driver hopped down, glancing nervously at Quinn before opening the door. "Mr. Foster?" the man called. There's been a situation." Quinn's stomach clenched as a woman emerged from the stagecoach. She wore a simple blue traveling dress, dusty from the journey, and clutched a small valise. Her honey blonde hair was partially hidden beneath a modest bonnet. But what seized Quinn's attention was her face. A dark purple bruise bloomed across her left cheekbone, extending toward her eye. Her lip was split at the corner. She kept her gaze lowered, trembling visibly as she approached. When she finally looked up, Quinn saw something in her blue eyes that struck him to his core, not just fear, but resignation. As if violence was something she'd come to expect. "Mr. Foster." Her voice was barely audible. "I'm Jane Zimmer. I understand if you wish to reject our arrangement." She extended a folded note with shaking fingers. Quinn opened it, reading the unfamiliar handwriting. "The lady refused my advances. Teach your wife better manners, rancher." Quinn's jaw tightened, fury rising like a storm. He glanced toward the departing stagecoach, half-minded to chase it down, but the woman before him needed attention more than the coward deserved vengeance. "You're not alone now," he said quietly, pocketing the note. "Come inside, Miss Zimmer." In that moment, everything Quinn thought he knew about solitude and survival in the West began to crack. Jane, 22 years old, sat stiffly at Quinn's kitchen table as he gently pressed a cool cloth to her cheek. She flinched at first, but gradually relaxed under his careful ministrations. "The driver?" Quinn asked, his voice controlled despite the anger simmering beneath. "No," Jane whispered. "A passenger. He boarded at the last stop. When the others disembarked for the night, She swallowed hard. "The driver intervened when he heard my scream." Quinn nodded, relieved at least that the stage company hadn't completely failed in their duty. "I'm sorry this happened. No one should treat a lady this way. Are you sending me back?" The question emerged small and frightened. "Back?" Quinn blinked in confusion. "To Philadelphia? Or to another prospective husband?" Jane's hands twisted in her lap. "I would understand. You advertised for a bride, not damaged goods." Quinn set the cloth aside, making sure to maintain a respectful distance. "Miss Zimmer, I've no intention of sending you anywhere. Unless that's your wish." Her eyes widened slightly. "But my face will heal," he finished, "and has nothing to do with our arrangement. The guest room is prepared for you. You'll stay there until you're recovered enough to make your decision." "My decision?" Quinn nodded. "Whether to return east or to proceed with our agreement. Either way, you'll be safe here." For the first time, something like hope flickered across Jane's features. "I didn't expect kindness," she admitted. Then I reckon we've both got some learning to do, Quinn replied, standing to prepare her a cup of tea. Because I didn't expect to feel so responsible for someone I just met. That night, lying in his bed listening to the occasional creak of floorboards as his guest adjusted to strange surroundings, Quinn confronted an uncomfortable truth. His father's warnings about the dangers of attachment seemed hollow compared to the very real threat the world posed to a woman alone. Perhaps isolation wasn't wisdom, but cowardice dressed as strength. The next morning, Quinn's ranch hands arrived to find their employer in an unusual state. Quinn had always maintained a respectful but distant relationship with his workers, 3 seasoned cowboys who appreciated his fair pay and straightforward expectations. Now, he pulled them aside before Jane emerged. Miss Zimmer arrived yesterday, he explained. She was assaulted on the stagecoach. She's healing and will be staying in the main house. I expect nothing but respect and courtesy. Hank, the oldest hand at nearly 50, nodded gravely. Any man touches her gets introduced to my Winchester boss. Appreciate the sentiment, but let's hope it doesn't come to that, Quinn responded, though the loyalty warmed him. Over breakfast, Jane sat awkwardly across from Quinn, attempting to eat despite her swollen lip. When she struggled to butter her bread, Quinn quietly did it for her, without comment or expectation of thanks. It was this small kindness, more than his protection or shelter, that brought tears to her eyes. I haven't been entirely honest, she confessed suddenly. In my letters, Quinn set down his coffee. I'm listening. I wrote that I was a shopkeeper's daughter seeking new opportunities. That's true, but incomplete. Jane stared at her plate. My father died 2 years ago, leaving debts. My uncle took me in, but his wife resented the expense. They arranged a marriage to a business associate, a man 3 times my age who had buried 2 wives already. Quinn remained silent, giving her space to continue. I fled the night before the wedding with what little money my mother had hidden away years ago. I've been running for months, taking odd jobs until I saw your advertisement. She finally met his gaze. I didn't lie about wanting to work hard or being able to keep house. I simply omitted why I was so eager to travel west. Are you in legal trouble? Quinn asked practically. Anything following you I should know about? Jane shook her head. No warrants or crimes. Just an angry would-be husband and a disappointed family. Quinn nodded slowly. Then your past is your business. Out here, most folks are running from something or toward something. Sometimes both. Relief washed over Jane's features. Thank you for understanding. Understanding's free. Quinn replied with a slight smile. Now, you rest today. Dr. Matthews will be by this afternoon to check your injuries. As promised, the local doctor arrived, confirming nothing was broken. He left salve for the bruising and strict instructions for rest. Quinn threw himself into ranch work, giving Jane space while ensuring one of the hands remained within shouting distance of the house at all times. That evening, Jane insisted on preparing dinner despite Quinn's protests. He returned from the barn to find a simple but delicious meal waiting, the first home-cooked food he'd enjoyed in years, having subsisted on his own limited culinary skills. This is mighty fine, he complimented, watching as she managed a small, proud smile. I wasn't exaggerating my household abilities in my letters, Jane said. Though I admit, cooking for one person is different than for my father's shop staff. How many did you feed there? Quinn asked. 7 workers, plus customers sometimes. Her expression softened with memory. My father's bakery was small but respected. Everyone in the neighborhood came for our sourdough. Quinn leaned forward. You're a baker? Jane's eyes lit up for the first time since her arrival. Yes, it was my mother's recipe. She taught me everything before she passed. That's a valuable skill out here, Quinn observed. Nearest proper bakery is in Helena, nearly 60 miles away. Really? Jane considered this. I imagined even frontier towns would have basic amenities. Riversbend has a general store, saloon, and blacksmith. The mercantile sells hard bread that could break teeth. Quinn chuckled. Fresh bread is worth its weight in gold. Something sparked between them, not romance yet, but possibility. A shared recognition that they each possessed something the other valued. He offered security and a fresh start. She brought skills and civilization to his rustic existence. As days passed, Jane's bruises faded from purple to yellow. Her movements grew more confident as she adapted to the ranch's routines. Quinn kept his distance physically, but found himself sharing more than he intended during evening conversations by the fireplace. He told her about losing his parents, about the neighbor who'd tried to claim their land while he was still grieving, about the long nights wondering if he'd made the right choice staying when many his age headed to the gold fields or cities. In turn, Jane revealed her own struggles, a childhood in Philadelphia's changing neighborhoods, watching her mother succumb to consumption, learning to manage household accounts when her father's eyesight began failing. 2 weeks after her arrival, Jane approached Quinn as he mended tack on the porch. "I'd like to discuss our arrangement," she said, sitting beside him. The bruise had faded to a shadow, and she'd taken to wearing her hair loose around the house, golden strands catching the afternoon light. Quinn set aside his work. "All right. The doctor says I'm fully recovered." Jane folded her hands in her lap. "Which means I should make a decision about staying." Quinn nodded, surprising himself with how much her answer suddenly mattered. "If you're still amenable," Jane continued carefully, "I would like to honor our agreement. To become your wife." Relief flooded through Quinn, though he maintained his composure. "You're certain?" "There's no rush, Jane. I've given it considerable thought," she assured him. "You've been honorable and kind when you had no obligation to be. I believe we could build a good partnership." Quinn studied her face, searching for any reservation. "A partnership requires honesty. So I'll be plain. This isn't just practicality for me anymore. I've grown to care for you. I'm not expecting love, but I want you to know where I stand." Color rose in Jane's cheeks. "I appreciate your candor. I can't pretend to know what love should feel like, but I feel safe with you, Quinn. Respected. That's more than I dared hope for when I boarded that stagecoach." It wasn't a declaration of passion, but to Quinn, it felt momentous, an admission of trust from someone who had every reason to withhold it. "Then if you're willing," he said, "we could ride into town tomorrow, see Reverend Davis." Jane nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "I would like that." The wedding was simple, just the two of them, the Reverend and Quinn's ranch hands serving as witnesses. Jane wore her best dress, a modest pale yellow garment that brightened her complexion. Quinn had purchased a small gold band from the general store, surprising her with this unplanned expense. As they exchanged vows in the small whitewashed church, Quinn felt an unfamiliar emotion swell in his chest. Not just contentment, but possibility. Perhaps his father had been wrong. Perhaps the frontier didn't demand isolation, but instead made connection all the more precious. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, both nervous about what the night would bring. Quinn had prepared a separate bedroom for Jane, unsurprising her with his consideration. "I know this isn't a love match yet," he explained as they stood awkwardly in the main room. "I won't rush you, Jane. We have time to grow together." Gratitude shone in her eyes. "Thank you." That night, they slept apart, but something had fundamentally changed in the house. It no longer echoed with emptiness, but hummed with potential. The following weeks established a rhythm to their shared life. Jane transformed the ranch house with small touches. Curtains sewn from fabric ordered from the mercantile, wildflowers arranged in mason jars, the constant aroma of fresh bread permeating the previously utilitarian space. Quinn found himself hurrying through chores to return home, no longer dreading the evening silence, but anticipating conversation, companionship. He began teaching Jane to ride, his steady hands guiding her as she gained confidence on horseback. She, in turn, insisted on improving his wardrobe, mending and altering stored clothes until he looked less like a bachelor surviving and more like a man thriving. Mrs. Patterson at the mercantile asked about my bread recipe. Jane mentioned one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. She offered to sell loaves if I'd bake extra. Quinn smiled. "Told you it was valuable." "What did you tell her?" "That I'd discuss it with my husband." Jane glanced at him shyly. "I've been thinking, perhaps I could start a small business. Nothing that would interfere with ranch duties, but something of your own," Quinn finished. "I think it's an excellent idea." Jane's eyes widened. "You do?" "Most husbands wouldn't want their wives working outside the home." Quinn shrugged. "Most husbands didn't marry a master baker. Besides, I didn't bring you here to clip your wings, Jane. I brought you to share a life." She reached across the space between their chairs, tentatively taking his hand. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact. "You're not what I expected, Quinn Foster." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Is that good or bad?" Very good, she whispered. 2 days later, disaster struck. Quinn was repairing fence lines when Hank came galloping toward him, dust billowing behind his horse. Boss, riders at the ranch. 3 men, looking unfriendly. Quinn's blood ran cold. Jane, in the house last I saw. They were approaching the front door. Quinn didn't wait for more, spurring his horse homeward, Hank and the other hands close behind. 1,000 terrible possibilities flashed through his mind. Outlaws, land grabbers, or worse, someone connected to Jane's past. They thundered into the yard to find 3 well-dressed men dismounting before the house. Quinn jumped from his horse, hand hovering near his revolver. That's far enough, he called. State your business. The oldest man, gray-haired and expensively attired, turned with a look of disdain. Are you the man who took Jane Zimmer? Quinn's jaw tightened. I'm Quinn Foster. Jane Foster is my wife. The front door opened, and Jane appeared, face pale but composed. Uncle Herbert, she said coolly. You're a long way from Philadelphia. Jane, thank God you're alive. The man exclaimed, though his tone lacked genuine concern. We've been searching for months. Your fiancé has been beside himself. Mr. Caldwell is not my fiancé, Jane replied, descending the steps to stand beside Quinn. I made that abundantly clear before I left. The second man, younger and sharply dressed, stepped forward. Jane, this foolishness has gone on long enough. You have responsibilities to your family name. Quinn felt Jane tense beside him. You must be Caldwell, he said evenly. Indeed. Edgar Caldwell, Jane's betrothed. The man extended his hand as if expecting Quinn to shake it. I appreciate you looking after her, but I'll be taking her home now. Quinn ignored the offered hand. Jane isn't property to be taken anywhere. She's my lawfully wedded wife. Caldwell's expression hardened. A forced marriage, obviously. No woman would choose this. Wilderness over Philadelphia society. I chose Quinn freely, Jane said, her voice stronger than Quinn had ever heard it. And I choose him still. The third man, clearly a hired gun by his stance, shifted impatiently. Uncle Herbert noticed Quinn's ranch hands positioning themselves strategically around the yard. Perhaps we should discuss this civilly, Herbert suggested with forced pleasantness. Jane, surely we can speak privately? Quinn looked to Jane, allowing her to make the decision. She nodded slightly. We can talk in the house, Uncle. Mr. Caldwell and your associate will remain outside. Now see here, Caldwell began, but Herbert silenced him with a gesture. Very well. Lead the way, niece. Inside, Jane maintained her composure as Herbert launched into his rehearsed speech about family obligation and appropriate matches. Quinn stood by the window, watching the yard while listening. Your mother would be devastated to see you living like this, Herbert pronounced, gesturing around the modest but clean home. Married to a cowhand in the middle of nowhere. My mother taught me to value character above station, Jane countered. And Quinn is a ranch owner, not a hand. Herbert snorted. 100 acres of dust and a few dozen cows hardly compare to Caldwell's shipping business. Be reasonable, Jane. You cannot possibly be happy here. Jane's voice softened. But I am, Uncle. For the first time since Father died, I feel safe. Valued. Sentimental nonsense, Herbert dismissed. Caldwell has invested considerably in this venture. He's prepared to forgive your indiscretion and still make you his wife. There's nothing to forgive, Jane said firmly. And I'm already married. Herbert's facade of concern cracked. A frontier marriage by some circuit preacher hardly counts in Pennsylvania law. Edgar is prepared to offer your husband compensation for his inconvenience. Quinn turned from the window, unable to remain silent. Sir, you misunderstand the situation entirely. Jane isn't for sale, and neither is our marriage. Herbert's expression darkened. Young man, you have no idea who you're dealing with. Edgar Caldwell's influence extends further than you can imagine. One telegram, and you'll find your land claim challenged, your cattle unmarketable, your supplies cut off. Are you threatening us? Quinn asked quietly. I'm explaining reality, Herbert snapped. Jane belongs in civilization, not this savage country. The only savagery I've experienced, Jane interjected, was in civilized society, where I was bartered like livestock to settle my father's debts. She stood straighter. I won't return, Uncle. Not today, not ever. Herbert's face flushed with anger. You ungrateful. That's enough. Quinn interrupted, stepping between them. You've had your say, sir. Now I'll have mine. Jane stays if she chooses to stay. Any man who tries to force her otherwise will answer to me. You can't possibly think. I'm not finished, Quinn continued calmly. Your threats mean nothing here. My land is legally deeded. My cattle sell to the army regardless of Eastern influence, and Montana Territory has its own justice. So you have two choices: accept Jane's decision with grace, or leave without it. Herbert stared incredulously and used to being challenged. This isn't over, he finally sputtered, turning toward the door. When they rejoined the others outside, Caldwell took one look at Herbert's expression and knew the outcome. You've made a grave mistake, he told Jane. When you tire of playing frontier wife, don't expect my offer to remain open. I assure you, that won't be a concern, Jane replied. The three men mounted their horses, Caldwell turning to deliver a parting shot. Enjoy your wilderness, Jane. Winter comes hard in these territories. Perhaps you'll reconsider when you're freezing in this shack. They rode away, the hired gun casting one last measuring glance at Quinn and the ranch hands. The message was clear. This confrontation might have ended peacefully, but the threat remained. When they disappeared down the road, Jane's composure finally broke. She trembled violently, and Quinn guided her to the porch steps, sitting beside her. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never imagined they'd track me here. Quinn took her hand. You have nothing to apologize for. They won't give up easily, Jane warned. Edgar especially. He considers me a possession that was stolen. Let them come, Quinn said simply. This is our home, Jane. I won't let anyone take you against your will. Jane looked up at him, something new in her expression. Our home, she repeated softly. That night, for the first time, Jane came to Quinn's room. Not for passion, but for comfort, seeking the security of his presence as she processed the day's events. They lay side by side, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her protectively, speaking in hushed voices about fears and hopes until sleep claimed them both. The following weeks passed in tense vigilance. Quinn never rode out without ensuring Jane had protection at the ranch. The hands took turns standing watch, though no further threats materialized immediately. Despite the shadow hanging over them, their relationship deepened. Jane's small baking business flourished, with the mercantile unable to keep her bread in stock. Quinn expanded the kitchen to accommodate her work, pride evident as townspeople praised his wife's skill. Mrs. Patterson says people are timing their trips to town around your baking days, Quinn told her one evening, watching her knead dough by lamplight. Said a man from Helena offered to buy your entire stock last week. Jane smiled, flour dusting her cheeks. It feels good, contributing this way. Having something that's mine. Quinn moved behind her, hesitantly placing his hands on her shoulders. When she leaned back against him, he gathered his courage. Jane, these past months, you've become more than a partner to me. She turned in his arms, eyes searching his face. And you to me. I want you to know, Quinn continued carefully. Whatever comes with Caldwell and your uncle, I'll stand by you. Not from obligation, but because I've come to love you. Jane's breath caught. Love. Love, Quinn confirmed. I never expected it, never thought the frontier allowed for it. But you proved me wrong about so many things. Tears welled in Jane's eyes. I think I've loved you since that first day, when you looked at my bruised face and still saw a person worth protecting. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a promise rather than a passion. That night, they truly became husband and wife, discovering each other with reverent care. The following morning, Quinn watched Jane sleeping peacefully beside him, golden hair spread across the pillow, and knew with certainty that his father's warnings about attachment in the frontier had been profoundly wrong. Connection wasn't weakness. It was the very strength needed to survive the West's harshness. 2 weeks later, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. While Quinn and the hands drove cattle to a new grazing area, Jane remained at the ranch, baking for her next delivery to town. The approaching rider initially caused no alarm. Visitors weren't uncommon with her growing business reputation. But when Jane stepped onto the porch to greet the stranger, she recognized the hired gun from her uncle's visit. He dismounted slowly, eyes coldly assessing. Mrs. Foster, he acknowledged with mocking formality. Or should I say Miss Zimmer? I'm here to deliver a message from Mr. Caldwell. Jane stood her ground. My husband will return shortly. You can speak to both of us then. The man smiled unpleasantly. Mr. Caldwell's patience has expired. You have two choices. Return east willingly, or watch this ranch burn with your husband in it. You're threatening murder, Jane stated, fear churning beneath her calm exterior. I'm offering a business arrangement, the man corrected. Mr. Caldwell gets what he paid for, and your rancher husband keeps breathing. Seems fair. Get off our property, Jane ordered, backing toward the door where Quinn kept a shotgun. The man moved with surprising speed, blocking her retreat. You misunderstand. You're leaving today. Now. Jane's resistance was futile against the man's strength. He bound her wrists despite her struggles, forcing her toward his horse. Your husband's due back at sundown, yes? By then, we'll be halfway to the railway station. He'll come after me, Jane warned, desperately searching for anything to use as a weapon. That's the idea, the man replied coolly. And when he does, my associates will be waiting. Nothing personal, just business. Jane realized with horror the full plan, not just to abduct her, but to lure Quinn into an ambush when he pursued them. As the man forced her onto his horse, she made a split-second decision. Feigning compliance, she waited until he mounted behind her, then drove her elbow backward with all her strength. The blow caught him in the throat. He choked, grip loosening momentarily, and Jane threw herself sideways from the horse. She hit the ground hard, pain shooting through her shoulder, but scrambled to her feet and ran toward the barn. Behind her, the man recovered, cursing violently. That was a mistake, girl. Jane barricaded herself in the barn, frantically searching for a weapon as the man pounded on the door. She found a pitchfork, hands trembling as she positioned herself. When the door splintered open, she lashed out, catching the man's arm. He roared in pain but knocked the implement aside, advancing on her with murderous intent. Caldwell didn't specify what condition you needed to be in, he snarled. Jane backed away, trapped. Quinn will kill you for this. Your husband will never find your body, the man replied, drawing a knife. A gunshot cracked through the air. The hired gun staggered, confusion crossing his face before he collapsed forward. Behind him stood Hank, rifle still raised. You all right, Mrs. Foster? The ranch hand asked, hurrying to help Jane. Yes, she gasped, shock setting in. How did you? Boss sent me back to fetch more supplies, Hank explained, checking the fallen man to confirm he was dead. Saw the struggle from the ridge. Lucky timing. When Quinn returned at sundown to find Jane shaken but safe, the dead man's body covered in the barn, his entire world narrowed to a single truth. He had almost lost everything that mattered. This ends now, he declared, gathering Jane into his arms. We're going to Helena tomorrow, to the federal marshal. We'll file formal charges against Caldwell and your uncle for attempted abduction and conspiracy to murder. Jane nodded against his chest. He said there were others waiting. An ambush for when you came after me. Quinn's arms tightened around her. Then we'll bring enough men to handle them. I won't risk losing you, Jane. The next morning, Quinn assembled a formidable group, his ranch hands, the town sheriff, and 3 trusted neighboring ranchers. They rode first to the location Jane had overheard, a narrow pass where Quinn would likely have traveled in pursuit, and successfully captured 2 more hired guns waiting in ambush. In Helena, the territorial marshal took their statements gravely. The evidence was damning. Paid gunmen providing testimony in exchange for leniency, telegrams found on the dead man linking him directly to Caldwell, and Jane's clear account of the threats. We'll issue warrants for Edward Caldwell and Herbert Zimmer, the marshal promised. Whether we can extradite them from Pennsylvania is another matter, but they won't set foot in Montana territory without facing arrest. Quinn nodded grimly. That's a start. As they prepared to leave Helena, Jane touched Quinn's arm. I want to send a telegram. To whom? Quinn asked, surprised. To Aunt Margaret, Uncle Herbert's wife. She was never cruel to me, just indifferent. She should know what her husband has done. Jane's expression hardened, and that I'm pressing charges against both men for their crimes. Quinn smiled proudly. Let's do that. The telegram Jane composed was brief but powerful, detailing the attempted abduction, the murder plot, and her intent to testify against both men should they be brought to justice. She signed it, Jane Foster, Montana Territory, claiming both her new name and home with finality. 6 months passed with no further incidents. Whether deterred by legal consequences or simply thwarted by distance, Caldwell and Herbert made no more attempts to reclaim Jane. The ranch prospered, with Jane's baking business expanding to include a small shop in town, operated 3 days a week. On a crisp autumn evening, as they sat before the fireplace in their home, Jane placed Quinn's hand over her stomach with a tremulous smile. "Dr. Matthews confirmed it today," she whispered. "We'll welcome a child in the spring." Quinn's eyes widened, joy and wonder transforming his features. "A baby?" "Our baby." Jane nodded, laughing as he lifted her in a careful embrace, spinning her around the room. When he set her down, his expression grew serious. "I used to believe the frontier was no place for love, that attachment only led to heartbreak out here." He cupped her face gently. "You showed me how wrong that was. Having you to fight for, to build with, it's made everything worthwhile." Jane leaned into his touch. "I came west believing I was running from something, but I was actually running toward you, toward this life we've created." As winter settled over the Montana territory, blanketing their ranch in pristine white, the Foster home stood warm against the cold, a beacon of the truth both Quinn and Jane had discovered together. The frontier wasn't a place that demanded isolation. It was a place that made connection all the more precious, all the more worth fighting for. In the spring of 1876, Jane gave birth to a healthy daughter, named Margaret after the aunt who had surprised them by sending a gift of fine baby clothes and a letter of support after receiving Jane's telegram. Quinn expanded the ranch house, adding a nursery and a larger kitchen for Jane's growing business. Where once Quinn Foster had believed that love couldn't survive the harsh realities of frontier life, his home now stood as testament to the opposite truth. The West hadn't taken from him. It had given him everything he never knew to want: a wife who matched his strength with her own, a child who embodied their hope for the future, and the knowledge that no man truly thrives alone. Each evening, as they stood together on their porch watching the sun set behind distant mountains, Quinn would remember that first day, a bruised woman with a crumpled note, and the words that had changed both their lives. "You're not alone now." And they never would be again.